Like most Melburnians, most of my free time is spent going to events organised by the Wheeler Centre. And it so happened that last Sunday I attended a talk given by David Simon, the man responsible for those tremendous television series, Treme and The Wire. And Treme is Simon's ode to post-Katrina New Orleans, and it's driven by a belief, a faint belief, in the restorative value of culture, of how a city distressed and non-functional on so many levels can survive and even thrive when it digs into its cultural roots. In one compelling scene in the show's fourth series, one of the lead characters, Tony Burnett, that's T-O-N-I, Burnett, who's a civil rights lawyer, attends with her daughter a local performance of Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot. And in that wonderful way that Simon has, in the long narrative arc that he creates, events from season 1 of the series, the death of Tony's husband, in controversial circumstances, come back to haunt her and us in season 4. As she sits there watching the final scene of Godot, as Vladimir and Estragon argue with each other about what to do next, the power of the scene suddenly seems to her to be all about her own circumstances, in the way that great art often does, and she's overwhelmed by the moment. She grips her daughter's hand, and she's crying more and more uncontrollably as the characters on stage have their final, futile, vital argument about the whereabouts of Godot. Sitting on the other side of her is a black man in, I'd say, his 60s, and we can take it that he knows nothing of the play and has probably been dragged along to watch, as happens to all of us on occasions, that he knows nothing of Beckett and certainly nothing of the crying woman beside him, to whom, it has to be said, he is oblivious. He is, though, completely engrossed in the story that is unfolded on stage, and he sits there angry and affected and mumbles something which Tony hears, and it is enough to disturb her thoughts of her lost husband and everything else that is raining down upon her at that moment. "What did you say?" she says to the man next to her. And in one of the great lines of contemporary literature, overwhelmed by the story being told on the stage in front of him, and suddenly struck by the central truth of the play he is watching, he says to her, "Motherfucker ain't coming." This is pretty much how I feel about the possibility of a restorative media arising, one that both thrives commercially and gives sustenance to the civic life of the nation. That motherfucker ain't coming. I've been waiting for the media Godot to arrive for a while now, all my life in one respect, but more seriously in the decade and a bit since I started blogging in the United States in 2002. I don't really want to be too negative about this, because this is not a perfect world and we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So yes, we have to recognise that media organisations are under enormous commercial pressures, and that the technologies that have given we the people access to unprecedented stores of information that have allowed us, if we so choose, to participate as never before in the conversations about the things that matter to us as citizens, have also destroyed the business model on which media organisations operated, and have made it virtually impossible for them to employ journalists in the same numbers as they have in the past. Now, I get all that, I'm sure you all get all that, and God knows I've heard it often enough from journalists and editors. But I'm getting a bit sick and tired of that being trotted out as an excuse not to change or not to do better. I'm really sick of being told that I just don't get how tough journalism is, with its 24/7 news cycle, its multiple platforms and its collapsing business model. You know what? Lots of industries are forced to go through change, to do more with less, to lay off staff, to adapt or die. And I don't seem to remember anyone in the media thinking those industries should therefore be given a free pass. As I said in a recent article in the Walkley magazine, so kind of in the belly of the beast, talking to journalists, journalists. Such defensiveness from journalists is understandable, but to truly recognise how lame it is, consider as a journalist how much time you would give to the politician or bureaucrat who responded to your criticism of what they do with similar arguments. Quite frankly, you would scoff. It's time for journalists to get over their defensiveness, I think. We, the audience, understand perfectly well that the business model has collapsed, that the news cycle is long and grinding, and that you are being asked to do more with less. But here's the thing. We still think you should provide a service we are happy with, especially as, increasingly, you are asking us to pay for it by the erection of paywalls. It actually amazes me the extent to which the mainstream media fail to understand that the disruption that has affected their industry isn't just a matter of technological change, but one of relationship transformation, specifically the relationship between them and us, the audience. Time and again, on Twitter in particular, I see journalists talking to members of their audience as if they were some sort of nuisance that had to reluctantly be dealt with, or worse still, as some sort of interloper who had to be ejected, rather than as the person they are hoping will buy their product. It simply hasn't sunk in that journalism is no longer simply the act of delivering information, opinions, analysis, or news from on high, from behind the edited and moderated pages of a newspaper or the distant, abstracted space of television or radio, but is now an act of negotiation between journalists and their audience, of which the newspaper article or the television program or the radio show is just the starting point. This is why I called my book The New Front Page. I was trying to capture what it is that happens when an audience, now armed with maybe their own blog and certainly a Facebook account and a Twitter account as well, what these people do when they engage with the daily news and then use these news sites, these outlets of social media, to start talking not just to each other but to the journalists themselves about what they think about those stories, articles and television programs. We no longer go to a single source of information and accept as authoritative their particular take on a given news story. We flick between dozens, and we are much more likely to accept a friend's recommendation as to what to read first when we log onto Twitter or Facebook or whatever, than we are to accept whatever it is that a news editor has decided to give the biggest headline that morning. And also, if we don't like what the reporter has said, we can probably find them on Twitter and let them know. Many journalists don't like this, and they get cross and dismissive. You thus hear social media often referred to as an echo chamber. You see article after article complaining about what a cesspit the comments thread under news stories are, or how people only ever talk about their lunch, or other such put-downs of the form. The whole phenomenon of trolling, at least as it is explained and discussed in the mainstream, is an attempt by the mainstream to reassert their control over a space that is no longer at their exclusive command. If you can define a significant section of your audience, in other words, as uncivil, as disengaged, or as plain stupid, you can not only justify being dismissive of their criticism of your work, you can rationalise away the fact that a lot of the product that you supply is crap anyway, to quote Julia Gillard. Why should we expend resources, this is sort of how the logic goes, expend resources on complex, difficult investigative reports when all you want to read is Hollywood gossip or look at pictures of cats playing violins? As I say, being contemptuous of your audience is a great way to rationalise your own failures. Having said that, this is where the other shoe drops, I think. Some people, particularly those most passionate about news in a civic sense, as the place where power is meant to be held to account and we are meant to be able to find the information we need in order to be informed citizens, conclude from these failures of the mainstream that we can therefore do without the mainstream. There is a feeling that a hardy band of citizen journalists armed with phone cameras and blogs can somehow replace the difficult, expensive work that is serious journalism. And look, in some ways, there's an element of truth in that. Much expert analysis and just plain old interesting and worthwhile discussion of important political and social matters can be better got from the people formerly known as the audience. There's 20 economists I would go to read about the budget before I would go to the best general news reporter on the topic, or there are maybe 10 psephologists I would rather read than any mainstream journalist who's talking about interpreting the polls. But beyond those sorts of exceptions, on the idea that amateurs can replace professionals on an ongoing basis in gathering and reporting the daily news, then I say no, that motherfucker ain't coming. The fact is, even in this day and age of distributed knowledge, engaged audiences, accommodating technologies, and an industry struggling to come to terms with all of it, we need those big, institutionally important media organisations to perform the sorts of civic interventions that a functioning democracy requires. To put it simply, only power can stand up to power. Nick Davies, the Guardian journalist who exposed the corruption at the News of the World newspaper in Britain, could not have done what he did as Nick Davies blogger without the institutional clout and the financial support of the Guardian organisation. News International, the subject of his investigations, would have either laughed at him or crushed him in the courts. On this, let me quote David Simon again. He recently gave, a couple of years ago now, gave testimony to the US Congress talking about the future of journalism, and he made this point very well. He said, high-end journalism, that which acquires essential information about our government and society in the first place, is a profession. It requires daily, full-time commitment by trained men and women who return to the same beats day in and day out until the best of them know everything with which a given institution is contending. For a relatively brief period in American history, no more than the last 50 years or so, a lot of smart and talented people were paid a living wage and benefits to challenge the unrestrained authority of our institutions and to hold those institutions to task. Modern newspaper reporting was the hardest and in some ways most gratifying job I ever had, he said. I am offended to think that anyone anywhere believes American institutions as insulated, self-preserving and self-justifying as police departments, school systems, legislatures and chief executives can be held to facts gathered by amateurs pursuing the task without compensation, training, or for that matter, sufficient standing to make public officials even care to whom it is they are lying or from whom they are withholding information. It's a great speech. I'd really encourage you to Google it and have a read of the whole thing. So, look, we need the mainstream, I think, ladies and gentlemen. We the audience need to find ways to support them financially. But this is kind of where it comes full circle. The media itself needs to realise that that financial support will not be forthcoming unless they are genuinely responsive to the newly activated senses of their most engaged audience segment. I'm not asking them to pander to us, just to give us the respect we deserve, not just as their customers, but as the whole point of their activities as a civic institution. I really hate to belabour this point, but I keep coming across examples of journalists not only showing contempt for their audience and casting aspersions on their desire to join public conversations, but I still see evidence of this really crazy idea that we somehow, all of us, want to be journalists. I now happen to be a member of the Journalist Union, something that came about in part in response to an article I wrote on the topic, because the union invented a new class of membership designed to capture those of us who do most of our writing in the realms of new media. The attraction of joining is that it helps bridge the clout gap between the new and the old media and helps give those of us in the new media the same sort of access that the mainstream rightly takes for granted. But like a lot of people who involve themselves in new media, I don't really think of myself as a journalist, even though I do on occasions commit acts of journalism. This is a bit of a tired old argument, but as I say, I keep coming across journalists spouting off about it as if no one had ever thought of it before, and most worryingly, getting it wrong. So the most recent example of this was last week's Andrew Olley address given by Channel 9 breakfast show host Lisa Wilkinson. The speech itself is pretty interesting in parts, and she says some really good stuff, I think, about the role of women in media. But in the throat-clearing section at the beginning, Wilkinson betrays an amazing contempt for those who use social media, and in so doing misses the point of the whole social media exercise. She says, "For as we know, we're all members of a once rock-solid profession in full-blown transition. As this rising tide of new media swirls around us, sweeping away much of the landscape we once knew, and too often taking cherished colleagues with it. I am sad to note that since Mark Colvin delivered the 2012 Olley lecture, the MEAA, that's the union, reports that more than 1,000 jobs for Australian journalists have been lost, with the numbers going from 9,000 to just under 8,000 around the country. With the collapse of the funding model, our once exclusive fourth estate has been under siege by millions of enthusiasts bearing iPhones and laptops. So now, while traditional media struggles, contracts, reinvents and tries desperately to survive, everyone, it seems, can now join us in the sandpit and play journalist. Who needs membership in the mighty journalist union when all you need is a smartphone, an opinion that can be tightly compressed, and the desire to experience the sticky, sweet rush of a 140-character tweet gone viral?" Just pay attention to the language and what it reveals. The rising tide of new media, our once exclusive fourth estate, under siege, join the sandpit and play journalist. All you need is an opinion, blah, 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 blah. This is her audience she's talking about, and she exhibits nothing but contempt. But it's the accusation that we all want to play journalist that really stuns me. We do not. What we want to be is citizens. We want to contribute to the important debates that are central to our democracy. And if that means breaking into the once exclusive club of the Fourth Estate, then so be it, and get used to it. We can be as sympathetic as we like to the changes the media is going through, the hardships it is causing, the job losses that are resulting. But I can tell you one thing for sure, none of that is going to change or improve unless journalists get their head around the fact that a significant section of their audience now wants a say, an equal say, in the stuff they report on. And giving speeches mocking those who try and join these civic conversations and who you then expect to pay for and consume your product seems to me like a pretty dumb idea. So, look, just to conclude, good journalism will only thrive in a civic space that is engaged and vibrant. Our job going forward as journalists or citizens, as content providers, as consumers, as audience, is to use the public space created by the new technologies to reinvent what we think of as the news, the media, the public sphere, and turn it into the messy, contentious, endless negotiation that should be the hallmark of any functioning democracy. Journalists and editors really need to understand that we, the people, are their audience, not their enemy. Thank you very much.